A young woman marked by loneliness arrived at a mansion where affection was forbidden. There lived a rich, dark man, incapable of loving without destroying. When she whispered, "I want it with tenderness," she broke the rules of a cruel game. If you love stories of romance, watch until the end. You won't regret it. Subscribe to this channel and leave a comment telling us where you're listening from. Let's continue.
If this story has interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us from which city you are watching us. We will continue. In an era where love had been replaced by contracts and tenderness seemed a forgotten relic, Eleanor Smith, 22, descended from an old bus in the Appalachian Mountains near Asheville, North Carolina. She carried with her only a worn leather suitcase, an obsidian necklace inherited from her mother, who had disappeared under never-clarified circumstances, and a letter sealed with red wax sent by an unknown lawyer on behalf of an anonymous benefactor. The cold mountain air bit at her cheeks as she observed the landscape, thick fog partially obscuring an ancient manor whose towers rose like dark fingers pointing to the sky. Blackwood Manor, as the locals said, was a place where souls were lost and secrets were buried under layers of silence and tradition. Raised since the age of 14 in a convent on the outskirts of Savannah, Georgia Eleanor had grown up amidst echoes of prayers and closed windows, immersed in forbidden books and the vague memory of her mother's face, whose voice still echoed in her dreams saying, "Don't trust men who offer you the world before looking you in the eyes." A man with a stern face, dressed in an impeccable black suit despite the heat, awaited her at the end of the dirt road. "Miss Smith, welcome to Blackwood Manor. I am Roderick, the head butler. Mr. Matthew awaits you." Eleanor followed the man along a stone path flanked by ancient trees whose branches intertwined, forming a natural tunnel. With each step, she felt she was leaving behind the world she knew, entering one where time seemed to flow differently. At Blackwood Manor, she was not greeted by a family but by a silent, almost ritualistic structure, servants who did not smile, an elderly housekeeper with glassy eyes, and corridors that seemed more like labyrinths of the human subconscious. The walls were decorated with ancient indigenous art mixed with portraits of ancestors whose eyes seemed to follow her. "Your chambers, miss," said Roderick, opening a door carved with floral motifs. "Dinner is served at 7 o'clock sharp. Mr. Blackwood requests your presence. You will find appropriate clothing in the wardrobe." The room was a contrast of eras, colonial furniture alongside discreet modernities, large windows overlooking a garden of lush, yet mathematically precise vegetation. On the bed lay an antique-cut white dress with delicate lace and silk ribbons. Beside it, a note written in elegant calligraphy, "Put it on. It is tradition." Eleanor observed her reflection in a full-length mirror as she put on the dress. She felt like a doll in an adult's playhouse. The obsidian necklace, the only personal item she had decided to bring with her that night, contrasted with the immaculate whiteness of the dress, like a drop of night on virgin snow. At 7 o'clock sharp, Roderick knocked on her door. "The master awaits you in the library." She followed the butler through corridors where time seemed to condense. Paintings of women, all bearing an unsettling resemblance to herself, adorned the walls. Eleanor felt a shiver as she noticed that all of them wore the same white dress she now sported. The library was a sanctuary of dark wood and accumulated knowledge. Shelves reached the ceiling, sliding brass ladders to reach the highest volumes, and the unmistakable scent of old paper and leather. In the center, seated in an armchair with his back to the door, was he? "Mr. Blackwood, Miss Smith," Roderick announced before silently withdrawing. Matthew Blackwood, 46, rose with calculated movements. Owner of corporations operating on the fringes of global visibility, he was the last survivor of a lineage marked by scandals and tragedies discreetly silenced by fortune. A man shaped by pain and the need for control, who transformed every emotion he touched into a contract, and every contact he felt into a threat. His face was a composition of severe angles, softened barely by dark eyes that seemed to contain universes of untold stories. He wore a black suit, impeccable like a second skin, and his hair, Black with premature gray at the temples was slicked back with millimeter precision. Eleanor Smith, he pronounced her name like one reciting a forgotten spell. At last. She felt that those two words contained an entire story she was unaware of. Mr. Blackwood, I appreciate your invitation, though I must confess I don't understand the reason. Matthew walked towards a table where 2 glasses and a bottle of aged mezcal rested. The reasons will be revealed in due time. Do you know the history of this manor, Miss Smith? Only rumors in the village, she replied, watching him pour the liquor with precise movements. They say it hides more secrets than the caves of North Carolina. A fleeting smile crossed Matthew's face. The locals have a picturesque imagination. This manor was built by my great-great-grandfather, a man who believed that control was the only form of true love. Each generation has kept that belief alive, until me. He offered her a glass which she did not take. I don't drink, Mr. Blackwood. It is not a request, Miss Smith. It is a ritual. Eleanor took the glass, feeling the weight of the cut crystal. Rituals are for those who fear facing reality without structure. Matthew's eyes gleamed with renewed interest. Is that the philosophy they teach in convents now? It's what I learned reading secretly while the nuns slept. He circled the table, coming so close that she could smell his perfume. Sandalwood, leather, and something more primitive, more personal. You are here because you possess something that belongs to me. I possess nothing of value, Mr. Blackwood. On the contrary. His gaze lingered on the obsidian necklace. You possess blood, memory, and destiny. 3 things that were taken from me. Eleanor recoiled instinctively. You speak in riddles. Clarity will come with time. 7 days, to be exact. 7 days in which you will learn to obey, to be silent, and to feel according to my terms. I am not an employee you can hire, Mr. Blackwood. No, you are far more valuable. You are a missing link, a debt to be settled. Matthew moved closer, almost brushing her cheek with his fingers, but stopping millimeters from her skin. Tonight you will dine alone. Tomorrow your education will begin. As he was about to turn away, Eleanor, compelled by an inner voice she didn't recognize as her own, whispered, I want with affection. Matthew froze. His eyes for the first time showed authentic emotion, fear. Those words, so simple, reminded him of another night, another woman, and awakened something he was not prepared to face. What did you say? He asked, his voice barely a hoarse whisper. I said that if I am to be here, I want it to be with affection. Not with orders, not with rituals, with humanity. Matthew looked at her as if he saw a ghost materialized before him. Those words, where did you hear them? They come from me, from what I am. The mask of control returned to his face. You don't know what you're asking for, Miss Smith. Affection is an illusion that fades with the first disappointment. I offer you something more valuable, clarity. Purpose, truth. Without affection, all of that is just empty words, Eleanor replied, surprised by her own audacity. Matthew turned away towards the window, giving her his back. Tomorrow at 10 in the conservatory. You will wear the blue dress you find in your wardrobe. Do not be late. When Eleanor left the library, she felt she had entered a game whose rules she did not know, but whose outcomes would affect the rest of her life. On the walls, the portraits of women similar to her seemed to whisper warnings she could not comprehend, and in her mind a question hammered incessantly. Why had her words broken, even for an instant, Matthew Blackwood's perfect armor? Morning arrived with a thick fog that enveloped the manor like a ghostly embrace. Eleanor woke with a start, with the feeling of having been watched during the night. On the chair beside her bed, just as Matthew had promised, rested an antique-cut cobalt blue dress with a corset and petticoats that seemed straight out of another century. Upon opening the wardrobe in search of less formal alternatives, she discovered that all her clothes had disappeared, replaced by similar dresses in different colors, all labeled with days of the week and specific occasions: Monday breakfast, Tuesday garden, Wednesday music, as if her life at the manor was already meticulously planned without her consent. "Good morning, miss," said a soft voice from the doorway. A young maid of about 17 with sad eyes and small hands entered with a tray. "I am Lucy. The master has assigned me to assist you during your stay." "Thank you, Lucy, but I can dress myself," Eleanor replied, uncomfortable with the idea of being waited on. The young woman shook her head. "The master insists that protocols be followed. This dress has particularities." Eleanor soon understood what she meant. The corset required expert hands, and the folds of the dress had to fall in a specific way. As Lucy worked, Eleanor observed her concentrated expression. "Have you been working here long?" she asked. "All my life, miss. My mother served the Blackwood family and her mother before her." Lucy adjusted a ribbon with precision. "All the women in my family have served in this house." "And Mr. Matthew? Has he always been so strict?" Lucy completed, lowering her voice. "Not always. There was a time, before the tragedy, when music filled these halls." "What tragedy?" Lucy's fingers paused momentarily. "I shouldn't speak of that, miss. The walls of Blackwood Manor have ears, and the master has very clear rules about forbidden topics." When Eleanor finally arrived at the conservatory, 10 minutes before the agreed time, she was amazed by the glass and wrought iron structure that rose like a botanical cathedral in the middle of the garden. Plants from all regions of North America coexisted in a perfectly controlled ecosystem. Orchids from Florida alongside cacti from the Arizona desert, bromeliads from North Carolina near carefully cultivated magnolias. In the center, a white marble table was set with tea, fruits, and a sealed envelope. Eleanor approached cautiously, aware that every step might be observed. She opened the envelope and found a document titled Agreement of Stay and Conduct. It was a meticulously drafted contract stipulating the terms of her stay. 7 days, 7 trials, 7 unbreakable rules. "I see you are punctual." Matthew's voice startled her. He stood at the entrance of the conservatory, impeccably dressed in a dark gray suit that contrasted with the lush vegetation. His presence altered the atmosphere, as if even the air knew it should behave differently around him. "I read in your expression that you find my proposal unusual," he said, approaching with measured steps. "I find it disturbing that you intend to control every aspect of my existence in this house," Eleanor replied, holding the contract. "Why 7 days? What are you trying to prove?" "I am not trying to prove anything, Miss Smith. I am trying to confirm." Matthew took a black orchid, caressing its petals with a delicacy that contrasted with his usual rigidity. "Do you know why orchids fascinate me? Because they are deceptive. They seem fragile, but they are among the most resilient plants. They can flourish in the most adverse conditions if given the right environment. I am not a plant you can cultivate at your whim." "No, you are far more complex," Matthew approached, studying her as if she were a text in a language he almost understood. "For 7 days, you will follow my instructions to the letter. Each day has a purpose, each trial a reason. If at the end of the 7th day you still do not understand why you are here, you will be free to leave with generous compensation. And if I refuse, then you will never know the truth about Audrey." The name fell between them like a stone in still waters. Eleanor felt the air leave her lungs. "Did you know my mother?" "I knew her better than anyone in this world." Matthew's eyes darkened with painful memories. "The contract, Miss Smith. First rule, absolute obedience. Second, total discretion about what happens within these walls. Third, no contact with the outside world during the 7 days." Eleanor read the following rules with growing unease. She could not enter the east wing of the manor without authorization. She should participate in a nightly ceremony each sunset. She could not ask questions about Matthew's past. And most disturbing of all, she should surrender a part of herself at the end of each day. "What does this last rule mean?" she asked, pointing to the final clause. "Each night you will give me a personal object, a memory, or a confession. Something that defines you, that is part of your essence." Matthew extended his hand towards her obsidian necklace. "Starting with this." Eleanor recoiled instinctively, protecting the necklace with her hand. It's the only thing I have left of my mother. I cannot. Precisely why it must be the first. Matthew's eyes locked onto hers. Attachment is a form of slavery, Miss Smith. To be free, you must first break your emotional chains. Says the man who has turned his own pain into the walls of this prison. Eleanor replied with an audacity she herself did not recognize. For an instant, Matthew's mask cracked, showing surprise and something deeper, admiration. Your first trial begins now, he said, regaining his composure. You will spend the day learning the history of Blackwood Manor. Roderick will be your guide. Tonight, during dinner, you must recite the names of my ancestors in chronological order, along with their contributions to the property. And if I fail, then I will understand that you are not ready to know the truth. Matthew handed her an antique fountain pen. Your signature, please. Eleanor looked at the contract, aware that she was about to enter a labyrinth from which she might not escape. But Audrey's name echoed in her mind. If Matthew had known her mother, if he knew what had really happened to her. She signed with a trembling hand. Excellent. Matthew took the contract, folded it meticulously, and put it in his jacket. Roderick awaits you in the library. Do not keep him waiting. As Eleanor was about to leave, Matthew added, One more thing, Miss Smith. The affection you mentioned last night, it is a luxury I cannot afford. Nor can you if you wish to survive in this place. Everyone needs affection. Mr. Blackwood, even you, especially you. For a second, Eleanor thought she saw vulnerability in his gaze, but it vanished so quickly she might have imagined it. The rest of the day passed between lessons on the Blackwood dynasty, a lineage dating back to colonial times that had accumulated power through strategic alliances and, at times, questionable methods. Roderick, with his monotonous voice and encyclopedic knowledge, guided her through portraits, documents, and family relics. But it was one particular portrait that caught Eleanor's attention. A young woman, with her same eye color and a defiant expression, dressed in a traditional indigenous North American outfit. The plaque beneath the painting had been filed down until the name was erased. Who is she? Eleanor asked Roderick. The butler, usually impassive, visibly paled. That information is not part of the official tour, miss. But she looks like... It's getting late, Roderick interrupted. We must continue if you want to memorize all the names before dinner. As they moved on, Eleanor couldn't help but notice that there were empty spaces on the walls, as if some portraits had been recently removed. And every room they visited seemed to have an additional door, always closed, always forbidden. Blackwood Manor was not just a house. It was a labyrinth of secrets, and Eleanor had just begun to decipher the first level. That night, during dinner, Eleanor perfectly recited the names of the Blackwood ancestors. The surprise in Matthew's eyes was barely perceptible, but enough to confirm that he had not expected her success. When she finished, a thick silence settled between them, broken only by the tinkling of silver cutlery against antique porcelain. Impressive, Matthew finally conceded. Roderick must be an exceptional teacher. Or perhaps you underestimate my learning ability, Eleanor replied, holding his gaze. A fleeting smile crossed Matthew's face. The second trial will be less academic, tomorrow morning in the stable. When Eleanor returned to her room, she found a small carved wooden box on her pillow. Inside was a paper with elegant calligraphy, your first payment. It is time to fulfill your part of the contract. Eleanor took the obsidian necklace in her hands. She closed her eyes, remembering the last time she saw her mother, a misty morning, similar to the one that had greeted her upon her arrival at the manor. Audrey, with silent tears sliding down her cheeks, had handed her the necklace. Never take it off, she had said. It will keep you safe when I cannot. With trembling hands, Eleanor unclasped the necklace. As she held it, she noticed that the stone emitted a strange warmth, as if it had a life of its own. She hesitated for a moment, but finally placed it in the box and left it on her bedside table. That night, her dreams were plagued by whispering voices and endless corridors. The next morning, the air smelled of wet earth and something indefinable, something ancient. Eleanor headed to the stables dressed in the attire designated for that day, a dark green riding dress with embroidered details reminiscent of traditional Navajo designs. The stables of Blackwood Manor were an imposing structure of wood and stone, housing purebred Spanish horses and North American criollos. Matthew was already there, dressed for riding, alongside two magnificent specimens, a jet-black stallion and a chestnut mare. "Good morning, Miss Smith. I hope you rested well." "I would have rested better with my necklace," she replied, unable to help herself. Matthew studied her expression. "Attachment is a weakness you cannot afford during our agreement. The chestnut mare, Star, will be your companion today. Do you know how to ride?" The nuns did not consider horseback riding a necessary skill for a life of seclusion. "Then you will learn. The second trial consists of following me through the manor's boundaries without losing your way. If you get lost, you will have to find your way back alone." Eleanor observed the mare with apprehension. "It seems dangerous for someone without experience." Star was specifically trained for novice riders. "Trust her more than yourself and you will be fine." Matthew approached, and for the first time since her arrival, he touched her. It was only his hands helping her mount, but Eleanor felt an electric current at the contact. Matthew's hands were surprisingly warm for someone so cold. "Posture is fundamental," he said, adjusting her position with precise touches that seemed almost clinical, but which hid a palpable tension. Straight back, firm knees, reins loose but controlled. The secret is not to dominate the animal, but to establish a silent conversation. Soon they were riding along trails that meandered through coffee plantations and misty forests. Eleanor, after some insecure beginnings, discovered she had a natural affinity with Star. The mare responded to her most subtle movements, as if both shared a connection that transcended the brief time they had been together. Matthew rode slightly ahead, occasionally looking back to check her progress. They had been traversing the property for almost an hour when he stopped in a forest clearing. In the center was a circle of stones, similar to a miniature ancient indigenous altar. "We will rest here," he announced, dismounting with elegance. Eleanor dismounted with less grace but without falling, an achievement she considered significant given her inexperience. The clearing was imbued with a strange energy, as if time flowed differently among those ancient stones. "What is this place?" she asked, approaching the circle. "A sacred place for the indigenous people who inhabited these lands before my family. They say the veil between worlds is thinnest here." Matthew extracted a canteen and two small silver cups from his saddlebags. "This place has a purpose in our journey today." He offered her a cup with an amber liquid. "Spring water mixed with agave nectar, refreshing after the ride." Eleanor took the cup cautiously and drank. The taste was sweet, with an herbal aftertaste she couldn't identify. "I feel like you are leading me along a predetermined path, Mr. Blackwood. Every step I take seems to be part of a plan I am unaware of." Perceptive observation. Matthew sat on one of the stones. "Life is rarely improvisation, Miss Smith. Even what seems like chance is often the result of forces operating beyond our immediate comprehension. Like my arrival at the manor? Especially your arrival." Eleanor approached him, determined to change the dynamic between them. "Why don't you tell me about Audrey? You promised me answers." "At the end of the 7th day, no sooner." Matthew's eyes darkened. "Each trial is a step towards the truth. If I revealed everything now, you wouldn't have the necessary context to understand it. Or perhaps you fear that if I know the truth, I will leave before you can fully execute your plan." Matthew looked at her with renewed interest. "You challenge me in the same way she did. The same way you tilt your head slightly when you are annoyed." "Who? My mother?" A cold wind swept through the clearing, swaying the branches of the trees. Matthew stood up abruptly. "It's time to continue. The next part of the journey is more challenging." For the next few hours, they rode over increasingly rugged terrain. Unlike the beginning, Matthew now seemed intentionally to quicken the pace as if to test her. The paths became diffuse, and on several occasions, Eleanor had to rely more on Star's instinct than on her own perceptions to avoid losing sight of Matthew. When they reached a crystal-clear stream, he stopped abruptly. "From here, you will continue alone to the manor." "Are you joking?" "I don't know the way." "That is precisely the trial, Miss Smith, to find your own way back." "I could get lost, or worse." "Star knows the way. The question is whether you will be able to listen to her." Matthew leaned down from his horse, coming so close that Eleanor could feel his breath. Some lessons are only learned in solitude. Without further explanation, he spurred his horse and disappeared into the vegetation, leaving her alone with the sound of the water and her own racing thoughts. Eleanor looked around, evaluating her options. The sun was beginning to set, and the fog thickened among the trees. She closed her eyes, remembering the path they had taken. She had paid attention to certain natural markers, a peculiar rock formation, a fallen tree, the distant sound of a waterfall. "Good, Star," she murmured, stroking the mare's neck. "It seems we depend on each other now." To her surprise, instead of feeling fear, a strange calm enveloped her. It was as if a part of her had been waiting for this moment. To be alone, to make decisions for herself, without Matthew's watchful shadow or the suffocating walls of the manor. During the journey back, Eleanor discovered that Star did indeed know the way, but did not follow it automatically. The mare would stop at forks in the path, as if waiting for Eleanor to make the decision. It was a subtle dance between trust and leadership. The forest was beginning to darken when she spotted a structure among the trees. It wasn't the main manor, but a small stone cabin partially covered by flowering vines. Curiosity overcame prudence, and Eleanor dismounted to investigate. The door was ajar, like a silent invitation. Inside, time seemed to have stopped, furniture covered with yellowed sheets, shelves with jars of dried herbs, and on a worn wooden table, a worn leather journal. Eleanor took the journal with trembling hands and opened it. The first page contained only a name written in faded blue ink. Audrey Miller. Her heart skipped a beat. It was her mother's handwriting, unmistakable even after so many years. She quickly flipped through the pages, finding fragments that spoke of the manor, of strange rituals, and repeated mentions of a he whom she never named directly. The last entry was dated 1 week before Audrey's disappearance. The ritual is almost complete. 7 days, 7 trials. He has promised me freedom if I pass the last one, but now I understand that the true trial is for him, not for me. I tried to love him as he needed to be loved, but his heart is sealed by fear. If you read this, my child, remember, true affection is not demanded, it is given freely. The sound of approaching hooves startled her. Quickly, Eleanor hid the journal in the folds of her dress and left the cabin. To her surprise, it wasn't Matthew approaching, but Roderick mounted on a gray horse. "Miss Smith, the master is worried. It's getting late." "I strayed from the path," Eleanor explained, mounting Star again. Roderick studied her with narrowed eyes. "These lands hold many secrets, miss. Not all are meant to be discovered." As they rode back to the manor, Eleanor felt the weight of the journal hidden in her dress. She had found something more valuable than the way back, a direct connection to her mother and, perhaps, the first real pieces of the puzzle that Matthew Blackwood had built around her. Upon returning to the manor, twilight tinged the sky with violet and orange hues that reflected in the windows like silent flames. Matthew waited on the main porch, his figure silhouetted against the warm light emanating from within. His expression was indecipherable, but Eleanor could perceive a certain tension in the way his hands gripped the wrought iron railing. "I was beginning to worry," he said, studying her face. "I see Roderick had to rescue you." "I didn't need rescuing," Eleanor replied, dismounting with more confidence than she had that morning. "I knew the way. I just decided to explore it at my own pace." A spark of curiosity ignited in Matthew's eyes. And what did you discover in your exploration? Eleanor felt the weight of the journal against her body. That this land hides more than it reveals at first glance. An astute observation. Matthew approached, helping her fully dismount. His hands lingered on her waist for a second longer than necessary. Tonight we will dine in the main dining room. The Blackwood family maintains centuries-old traditions to honor its special guests. Is that what I am? A special guest? You are much more than that, though you don't yet understand. Matthew offered her his arm with antiquated formality. You have an hour to refresh and change. Lucy will assist you. In her room, Eleanor found Lucy preparing a bath with flower petals and local herbal essences. The fragrant steam filled the room with aromas of jasmine and marigold. The master asked me to give you this, Lucy said, pointing to a burgundy silk dress spread out on the bed. Beside it was a small box similar to the one she had received the previous night. Eleanor waited for Lucy to leave before extracting her mother's journal from the folds of her riding clothes. She hid it under the mattress, making sure it wasn't visible. Then she immersed herself in the perfumed water, feeling her sore muscles from the ride gradually relax. As she prepared, her mind replayed the fragments of the journal she had managed to read. Audrey had been in that same manner, had participated in the same trials she now faced. But why? What was Matthew seeking by repeating this strange ritual with her? The burgundy dress was a masterpiece of traditional North American tailoring, intricate embroideries representing birds of paradise intertwined with floral motifs in golden threads. As she put it on, Eleanor noticed that it fit her figure perfectly, as if it had been made expressly for her. Or, perhaps, she opened the box that accompanied the dress. Inside was a note. Your second payment for the trial successfully completed today. I await your second surrender tonight. Eleanor pondered what she could surrender that would represent a significant part of herself. Her gaze fell on a small silver crucifix she had brought from the convent, a gift from the Mother Superior when she turned 18. She took it between her fingers, remembering the elderly nun's words. So you never forget that faith is an anchor in times of storm. With the crucifix tucked into a small handbag, Eleanor descended to the main dining room, where a scene straight out of another century awaited her. Crystal chandeliers illuminated an imperial table covered with antique lace tablecloths. Chinese porcelain dinnerware and silver cutlery gleamed under the dancing candlelight. Matthew, dressed in a formal black suit and an immaculately white shirt, stood at the head of the table. You look dazzling, he said, formally kissing the back of her hand. The color suits you well. It was my mother's favorite color, Eleanor replied, carefully observing his reaction. An almost imperceptible twitch tightened the corner of Matthew's lip. An interesting coincidence, is it? I'm starting to believe there are no coincidences at Blackwood Manor. Matthew led her to her seat, to his right. The third trial begins now. Miss Smith, tonight you will learn about the family rituals that have kept the Blackwood lineage united through generations. Dinner was served with ceremonial precision by a team of silent servants. Traditional regional dishes reinterpreted with French technique, chiles en nogada, black mole with rare spices, and Florida-style fish with ingredients specially brought from the coast. During the meal, Matthew narrated the story of an ancestral ritual. Each generation of the Blackwood family had to find what they called a perfect soulmate, someone who embodied specific qualities to strengthen the lineage. It is not a matter of romantic love as the modern world understands it, he explained. Serving wine from a bottle that, he mentioned, had been buried the day his grandfather was born. It is a calculated union to preserve certain capabilities. What capabilities? Sensitivity, intuition, connection with what some would call the supernatural. Matthew observed her over his glass. Some members of my family possessed gifts that modern science cannot explain. These gifts are transmitted only under certain conditions. And you believe I possess those gifts? I don't believe it. I know it. Matthew put down his glass, staring at her. I knew it from the moment I saw your photograph, and I confirmed it when you uttered those words in the library. I want with affection. Why are those words so important to you? Matthew's mask of control cracked for an instant. Because they were the last words I heard from someone I once promised to protect. The silence that followed was so dense that Eleanor could feel it pressing against her skin. Matthew quickly recomposed himself, regaining his impenetrable facade. After dinner, we will proceed to the third part of the ritual in the ceremonial chamber. The so-called ceremonial chamber turned out to be a circular room on the ground floor, with walls covered in antique mirrors and a black marble floor veined with golden lines forming astronomical symbols. The vaulted ceiling was painted with a mural representing constellations and ancient indigenous deities intertwined with Catholic saints, a visual fusion of beliefs that reflected the cultural syncretism of the region. In the center was a round table of polished obsidian, and on it 7 objects arranged in a circle: a white rose, a silver-hilted dagger, an hourglass, a small crystal pyramid, an ancient book, a jade bracelet, and an ornate key. The ritual of the 7 elements, Matthew explained. Each object represents an aspect of the human being that must be in harmony for the union to be fruitful. Union? You speak as if this were a marriage ceremony. It is much deeper than a conventional marriage. Matthew lit candles strategically placed around the room. It is a fusion of destinies. The flickering light created shadows that danced on the mirrored walls, multiplying to infinity. Eleanor felt that the room itself breathed, like a living organism attuned to Matthew's movements. Your task tonight is to intuitively choose one of these objects, the one that calls to your spirit. Eleanor looked at the objects with distrust. What if I refuse to participate in this ritual? Then you will have failed the 3rd trial, and our chance to discover the truth about Audrey will vanish. Matthew stood behind her, so close she could feel the warmth of his body. Close your eyes. Let your deepest senses guide you. Eleanor closed her eyes, more out of curiosity than obedience. Immediately, she felt a strange vibration in the air, like static electricity brushing her skin. Without knowing why, her hand moved forward, hovering over the objects until it stopped over one of them, the key. Interesting choice, Matthew murmured, and Eleanor could detect genuine surprise in his voice. The key represents access to hidden knowledge, to the secrets of the universe, and to the closed doors of this manor. Eleanor took the key, feeling its unusual weight. It didn't seem made of ordinary metal. What door does it open? That will depend on you. Some keys open more than physical locks. Matthew took her other hand. Now, the 2nd payment for the trial successfully completed today. Eleanor extracted the crucifix from her purse and placed it in Matthew's outstretched palm. My anchor in times of storm. Matthew examined the object with an indecipherable expression. Faith, another trait you shared with her. With my mother. With Audrey. Matthew put the crucifix in the inner pocket of his jacket, next to his heart. Tomorrow we will continue with the 4th trial. Rest well, Eleanor. You will need it. It was the first time he had called her by her first name, and the unexpected intimacy unnerved her. As she retired to her room, the key weighed in her hand as both a promise and a threat. That night, while the manor slept, Eleanor took her mother's journal from its hiding place and continued reading by candlelight. Disturbing passages revealed themselves before her eyes. Matthew is consumed by family tradition. He believes our union will fulfill an ancient Blackwood prophecy. He speaks of special abilities, of sensitivity to the supernatural, of a lineage that must be preserved at all costs. Sometimes I see glimpses of the man he could be if he freed himself from these self-imposed chains. There is goodness in him, buried under layers of pain and duty. Eleanor turned the pages until she found another revealing entry. Today I found the sealed room in the East Wing. What I saw there made me understand that I am not the first to be subjected to these trials. There have been others before me, all with my face, all carefully chosen for their resemblance to me or I to them. I still don't understand my role in this cycle, but I am afraid. Not for myself, but for my daughter. Eleanor dropped the journal, her mind racing, processing the implications. She finally understood why Matthew had brought her to the manor. It wasn't simply because of her resemblance to Audrey. It was because she was part of an older, more mysterious cycle than either of them. With renewed determination, she took the key she had chosen in the ritual. Tomorrow she would explore the East Wing, wherever it might be. It was time to discover what doors she could truly open, both literally and metaphorically. Dawn arrived with a dense blanket of fog that enveloped the manor like a whispered secret. Eleanor woke before the servants, determined to use the early hours to explore the East Wing before her fourth trial. Dressed in a simple blue dress she had found in the wardrobe, she tucked the ceremonial key and some torn pages from her mother's journal into the hidden pockets of her skirt. The manor's corridors, illuminated by the grayish light of dawn, seemed narrower and more winding than during the day. Eleanor advanced cautiously, her steps muffled by the antique carpets. She followed the directions she had memorized from Audrey's journal. The East Wing is located behind the third library, hidden behind a mirror that reflects what you seek, not what you are. The third library turned out to be a small circular room filled with ancient manuscripts and rolled maps. Unlike the other rooms, this one had an air of controlled abandonment, as if it were kept clean but rarely visited. On the north wall, as the journal described, there was a gold-framed mirror with inscriptions in a language Eleanor did not recognize. She approached the mirror and, to her surprise, did not see her reflection. Instead, the surface showed the blurry image of a woman who astonishingly resembled her, but with subtle differences: sadder eyes, longer hair, an almost imperceptible scar above her left eyebrow. The image changed before she could study it in detail, transforming into the silhouette of a door. Eleanor took out the ceremonial key. At first glance, there was no visible lock on the mirror or its frame. Guided by an intuition she didn't fully comprehend, she brought the key closer to the reflective surface. To her astonishment, the key seemed to partially merge with the mirror, as if it were liquid. She turned the key and heard an ancient mechanism disengage. The mirror slid aside, revealing a dark wooden door. Eleanor crossed the threshold and found herself in a narrow corridor lit by small crescent-shaped windows that let in misty streaks of light. The walls were covered with portraits, all of women who shared an unsettling family resemblance. Her same eyes, the same face shape, variations on a common theme that spanned generations. Each portrait had a plaque with a name and 2 dates. Eleanor stopped in front of the oldest. Hope Blackwood, 1786, 1812. The woman in the portrait held the same obsidian necklace that Eleanor had given to Matthew. She continued walking, studying each portrait. Marisol Cortez, 1813-1840, Carmela Archer, 1841-1866, Dolores Fontaine, 1867-1892, and so on. A procession of similar faces that ended with a portrait whose frame was empty, the plaque nameless. At the end of the corridor was a smaller door. Eleanor used the key again, which fit perfectly into the lock. The room that was revealed was a private sanctuary, a mix between a laboratory and a bedroom. Half-burnt candles, jars with dried herbs, an antique telescope pointed towards a window overlooking the sky, and on a 4-poster bed, a traditional North American wedding dress embroidered with motifs Eleanor recognized from the previous night's ritual. A mahogany desk dominated the center of the room. On it lay a book bound in red leather titled The Blackwood Prophecy, The Cycle of the 7 Souls. Eleanor opened it with trembling hands, finding pages written in archaic Spanish and complex astrological diagrams. Although she couldn't understand all the text, certain phrases caught her attention. When the 7 stars of the Big Dipper align with the moon in Scorpio, she who will break the cycle will be born. The sacrifice of the 7th bride will bring redemption to the cursed lineage. True love is the only key that can break the chains of 7 generations. In a secret compartment of the desk, Eleanor found letters written by Matthew to Audrey, revealing a completely different side of the man she had known. My dearest Audrey, each day without you is a torment. If I could defy family tradition without condemning us both, I would do so without hesitation. But the weight of 7 generations rests on my shoulders. I am the last Blackwood, and the prophecy must be fulfilled, or all sacrifices will have been in vain. I implore you to understand that what I do for love, not only for you, but for what you represent, our last hope of redemption. Eleanor was so engrossed in her discovery that she didn't hear the approaching footsteps until it was too late. The door burst open, and there stood Matthew, his face a mask of fury and pain. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, his voice a tense whisper. Eleanor held up the ceremonial key. "You gave me the means to find answers. Did you really expect me not to seek them?" Matthew's expression changed, anger giving way to something more complex, a mixture of admiration and resignation. "Of all of them, you are the first to have come this far so quickly." "Of all of them? Do you mean the women in those portraits? The previous Blackwood brides?" Matthew entered the room, closing the door behind him. For the first time, his perfectly controlled posture slightly crumbled. He looked older, more vulnerable. They were not brides. They were attempts. Each generation of my family has searched for the woman who could break the curse. What curse? Matthew walked to the window, looking out at the fog that was now beginning to dissipate. In 1786, my ancestor Duncan Blackwood made a pact with forces he didn't fully comprehend. In exchange for prosperity and power, he gave what he considered a lesser price, the ability to truly love. What he didn't understand was that in doing so, he condemned all future generations to a cycle of destructive passions. Eleanor approached the desk, touching the prophecy book. "And you believe that by finding the perfect woman you will break this curse? Not just any woman. One who possesses the essence of the 7 previous souls. One who can awaken the capacity to love in a Blackwood heart before it's too late?" Matthew looked at her intensely. "Each generation has found a woman they believed was the one. Each time the result has been tragic." "What happened to them?" "They disappeared. Some fled, others—" His voice trailed off. "My grandfather believed they had been claimed by the same forces with which Duncan made his pact, that each failure strengthened the curse." Eleanor felt a shiver run down her spine. "And Audrey? What happened to her?" Matthew's mask completely shattered. Audrey was different. She truly loved me, despite my flaws, despite the coldness that family tradition demanded I show. And I loved her more than I thought possible for a Blackwood. "Then why did she disappear?" Matthew approached her, and for the first time, Eleanor saw contained tears in his eyes. "Because she discovered the same thing you have discovered today. The truth about the cycle, about the 7 previous women, about the final ceremony." "What final ceremony?" "On the 7th day, the chosen one must make a decision, to voluntarily surrender to the Blackwood tradition, uniting her destiny with mine through a blood ritual, or to reject the cycle, condemning us both to remain trapped in the curse." Eleanor took a step back, horrified. "Blood ritual? It's not what you imagine. A simple drop of blood from both of us, mixed with the obsidian of the necklace, under the light of the full moon. If the union is true, the necklace will glow with its own light, signaling that the cycle has been broken." Matthew extended his hand, showing her a fine scar on his palm. "I have performed this ritual 6 times in the last 20 years. It has never worked." "And what makes you think it will work with me?" "Because you are Audrey's daughter." The words fell between them like a stone in deep waters. Eleanor felt the ground shift beneath her feet. "That's impossible. My mother died years ago. Your mother disappeared. She fled the manor when she discovered she was pregnant, fearing the ritual could harm the baby she carried." "My baby? Our baby?" Matthew approached, taking her hands in his. "You, Eleanor." "No. It can't be true." Eleanor withdrew her hands abruptly. "Are you saying you brought me here knowing I am your daughter? To complete a ritual that failed with my mother? I brought you here to break the cycle once and for all. The 7th generation, the last chance. It's twisted. It's sickening. It is our only hope for freedom." Matthew extracted from his pocket the obsidian necklace that Eleanor had given him. This necklace has passed from one generation to another, absorbing the essence of each woman who has worn it. Audrey took it when she fled to protect you, so that when the time came, you could complete what she could not. Eleanor looked at the necklace with new eyes, finally understanding why her mother insisted she never take it off. It wasn't simple jewelry. It was a key in an elaborate generational ritual. The fourth trial begins now, Eleanor. Not as it was planned, but perhaps as it was meant to be. Matthew offered her the necklace. You must decide. Accept your heritage and help me break the cycle, or reject it and condemn us both. Eleanor took the necklace, feeling its familiar and, now, ominous weight. I need time to process all this. Time is precisely what we don't have. The full moon is in 3 days. The 7th day. A soft knock on the door interrupted the moment. It was Roderick. Sir, there are visitors. They say they come on behalf of Mrs. Audrey. Matthew's eyes widened with genuine surprise. Audrey, is she alive? I don't know, sir. They only brought a letter sealed with black wax. Matthew and Eleanor exchanged a look laden with unanswered questions. The past they believed buried was about to burst into the present, changing the course of the destiny they had both feared and longed for simultaneously. The letter lay on a black velvet cushion in Matthew's main office, like a bomb about to explode. The black wax seal showed a symbol Eleanor recognized from the prophecy book, 7 stars arranged in the same configuration as the Big Dipper. Open it yourself, Matthew said, his voice tense with an emotion he could barely contain. If it truly comes from Audrey, this honor belongs to you. Eleanor took the envelope with trembling fingers. The paper was thick, of artisanal quality, and smelled faintly of jasmine, the perfume she remembered from her childhood. She broke the seal and extracted a single folded sheet. The calligraphy was unmistakable, the same as in the journal, the same as in the love letters she had found, the same as her mother's. Dearest Eleanor, she read aloud, her voice breaking slightly. If you are reading this, it means Matthew found you, just as I feared would happen someday. There are truths I couldn't reveal to you as you grew up, for your own safety and mine. The necklace I gave you is not just a family jewel. It is the key to a destiny I tried to avoid. I cannot come personally, but I have sent someone trustworthy. If you wish to know the whole truth, go to the town of Asheville at sunset. In the main church, ask for the healer. She will guide you to me. Matthew can accompany you, if he has changed as much as I hope. With eternal love, Audrey. The silence that followed the reading was dense, charged with possibilities. Matthew had remained completely still, like a statue whose marble had absorbed centuries of hope and despair. She's alive, he finally murmured, his voice barely audible. So it seems. Eleanor folded the letter meticulously. Shall we go? It could be a trap. From whom? From my mother? Matthew walked to the window, observing the mountainous landscape that stretched to the horizon. Audrey is not the only one who knows the Blackwood prophecy. Throughout the centuries, there have been interested parties in ensuring the cycle is never broken. Who? Rival families, practitioners of ancient traditions who consider the original pact sacred and inviolable. Matthew turned to her, his face a mask of determination. But if there's the slightest chance Audrey is alive, I must see her. I owe her that, and much more. Eleanor studied the man in front of her, trying to reconcile the multiple facets she had discovered. The cold and calculating host, the last descendant of a cursed lineage, her mother's desperate lover, her own biological father. Each revelation was a piece of a puzzle that was beginning to form a coherent, though disturbing, picture. We'll go together, Eleanor decided. But first I want you to tell me everything. No riddles, no trials, no rituals. The complete truth about you and my mother. Matthew nodded slowly. It's fair. Come with me. He led her to a room she hadn't seen before, an intimate parlor with walls covered in ancient and modern books. In the center were 2 leather armchairs in front of an unlit fireplace. Matthew lit the fire with precise movements, as if the act were part of a personal ritual. I met Audrey 23 years ago, he began, sitting opposite her. She arrived at the manor as a research assistant to an anthropologist studying the ancient indigenous traditions of the region. From the moment I saw her, I knew she was different from all the women I had known. Matthew told her how, despite his determination to maintain emotional distance, Audrey had penetrated his defenses with the same phrase Eleanor had uttered at their first meeting. "I want with affection." Those simple words had activated something in him that generations of Blackwoods had suppressed. The ability to love without calculating everything. To surrender completely. "We fell in love against all odds. Against all logic," Matthew continued, his voice softening as he recalled. "Audrey was light in a lineage of shadows. For the first time, I believed we could break the curse, not through rituals and traditions, but simply by loving each other." What went wrong? My grandmother, Madame Constance Blackwood, the last guardian of the family tradition, discovered our love. She revealed to Audrey the complete history of the curse, but with a crucial distortion. She told her that any child born of our union would be condemned to suffer the same fate, unless the ritual of the 7 trials was completed. Eleanor felt a shiver. And was it true? I don't know for certain. The original prophecy mentions a fruit of the 7th attempt that will be the key to definitive redemption. My grandmother interpreted this as a warning. I always believed it was a promise. Matthew looked directly at Eleanor, his eyes shining with contained emotion. When Audrey discovered she was pregnant with you, she panicked. My grandmother had filled her head with visions of a terrible fate for the child if the ritual was not correctly completed. So she fled. To protect me. To protect you, yes. One night she disappeared without a trace. She took the necklace, some belongings, and several ancient documents from the family library. I searched for her for years, but it was as if she had vanished. I hired investigators, traveled personally to dozens of places following false leads. When did you give up? I never gave up. Matthew stood up, agitated by the memories. But about 8 years ago, I found a clue about a young woman in a Savannah, Georgia convent who had an obsidian necklace identical to that of the Blackwood tradition. The report mentioned that her mother had recently passed away. Eleanor felt her world shake again. My mother died. Did she really die? I believe so until today. Matthew approached her, kneeling to be at eye level with her. Eleanor, during these days you have faced trials that were part of an ancient tradition. But now I understand that perhaps all of this has been a different trial. One not found in any book of prophecies, the trial of finding you, of recognizing you as my daughter, of breaking the cycle not through rituals, but through truth. Why didn't you tell me from the beginning that you were my father? Out of fear. Fear that you would reject me without giving me the chance to know you. Fear that the curse would be stronger than my desire to be the father I never had. Matthew took her hands in his. And most painfully, fear of loving you as you deserve to be loved and losing you, as I lost Audrey. At that moment, Matthew's face showed a vulnerability so profound, so authentic, that Eleanor felt something break inside her, the barrier of distrust she had built since her arrival at the manor. She saw in him not the manipulator obsessed with dark traditions, but a man trapped in a terrible inheritance, desperately seeking an escape. Let's go to Asheville, Eleanor decided. Let's discover together what awaits us there. The journey to the town was silent, each immersed in their own thoughts. Matthew personally drove an all-terrain vehicle along winding roads that descended from the mountain, while the sun began to set, tinging the landscape with golden and coppery hues. Eleanor wore the obsidian necklace, which felt warmer than ever against her skin. Asheville was a town of colonial architecture, with cobblestone streets and houses painted in bright colors. The main church stood in the central square, its twin bell towers silhouetted against the twilight sky. Groups of Cherokee and Lumbee indigenous people, in their traditional attire, moved between tourists and local inhabitants, creating a vibrant cultural tapestry. Inside the church, the air was cool and smelled of incense and candle wax. An elderly woman with indigenous features, dressed in a traditional tunic embroidered with symbols reminiscent of those in the prophecy, approached them as if she had been waiting. "The healer?" Eleanor asked. The elderly woman nodded. "My name is Madame Flora. Audrey said you would come." "Where is she?" Matthew asked, his voice tense with anticipation. "Patience, Matthew Blackwood. First you must understand." Madame Flora led them to a small side chapel dedicated to a virgin Eleanor did not recognize. "The story you know is incomplete. The pact Duncan Blackwood made was not with dark forces, as your family tradition says. It was with ancient guardians of these lands, spirits who protect balance." "What does that have to do with us?" Eleanor asked. "Everything." The elderly woman pointed to a mural Eleanor hadn't noticed before, partially hidden behind an altar. It depicted 7 women forming a circle around an 8th figure holding a child. The curse is not the inability to love. It is the fear of true love, transmitted from generation to generation like a disease of the soul. "And the ritual?" "The 7 trials?" Matthew insisted. "A distortion created by those who feared losing control over the Blackwood lineage." Madame Flora took from the folds of her dress a key identical to the one Eleanor had found. The true key has always been affection, freely offered and freely accepted. "Where is Audrey?" Matthew repeated, his patience waning. The elderly woman smiled enigmatically. "Closer than you think. Follow me." She led them out of the church, through increasingly narrow alleyways, until they reached a small house with a lush garden. The scent of jasmine permeated the night air. Madame Flora opened the door and invited them in. In the center of a candlelit room, seated in a wicker armchair, was Audrey. Time seemed to stop. Eleanor gazed at the woman whose face she had pursued in dreams and fragmented memories throughout her life. It was like looking into a mirror of the future, the same eyes, the same bone structure, but with lines of experience and wisdom that had not yet touched her own face. "Mom," Eleanor whispered, the word escaping her lips like a prayer. Audrey stood up, her eyes full of contained tears. "My child, my Eleanor." They embraced with the desperation of those who have been separated for too long. Eleanor inhaled her mother's familiar scent, a mix of jasmine and something indefinable she had always associated with security and love. When they finally separated, Audrey looked towards Matthew, who remained motionless in the doorway, as if fearing that any movement could break the fragile reality of the moment. "Matthew," Audrey said, her voice a mix of tenderness and caution, "you have found our daughter." "I thought you were dead," he replied, his voice barely a hoarse whisper. "For all these years, it was necessary. To protect Eleanor, to protect all of us." Audrey extended a hand towards him. "But now we are here, the 3 of us. The prophecy is being fulfilled, but not as generations of Blackwoods interpreted it." Matthew took a step forward, taking the offered hand. "What do you mean?" The 7th star, the 7th attempt, was never about finding the perfect bride to continue the lineage. It was about creating life, a love so pure and true that it would break the curse through a new generation. Audrey looked at Eleanor with infinite love. "Our daughter is the key, Matthew. Not as a sacrifice, but as a bridge between past and future." At that moment, the obsidian necklace around Eleanor's neck began to emit a soft glow, pulsing like a luminous heart. "The final ritual," Madame Flora murmured. "It is beginning on its own." The necklace's glow intensified, bathing the room in a warm light that pulsed to the rhythm of an invisible heart. Eleanor felt the heat radiating against her skin, but strangely it did not burn. It was like being enveloped in a luminous embrace, both protective and revealing. "What's happening?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Madame Flora approached with a ceremonial step. "The obsidian awakens. For 7 generations, this necklace has absorbed the longing, pain, and hope of the women linked to the Blackwood lineage. Now it recognizes the presence of the 3 souls necessary to complete the circle." "What circle?" Matthew asked, approaching Eleanor cautiously. "The one that always should have been," Father, mother, daughter. Past, present, and future united by true affection. The elderly woman extended her wrinkled hands towards the necklace. The prophecy speaks of a blood ritual, but not as your ancestors interpreted it. It is not about sacrifice, but about recognition. The blood you already share, the bond that neither time nor distance could break. Audrey stepped forward, standing beside Eleanor. For years, I believed that fleeing was the only way to protect you. Your grandmother Constance convinced me that any daughter born of our love would be condemned to repeat the cycle unless the traditional ritual was completed. My grandmother was always the fiercest guardian of tradition, Matthew said with bitterness. Even after her passing, her teachings continued to guide my actions. She wasn't evil, Audrey explained. She was just trapped, like all Blackwoods, in a distorted interpretation of an ancient truth. Madame Flora nodded gravely. The true curse was never the inability to love. It was the fear of true love, of unconditional affection. Each Blackwood generation sought a woman who could break the curse through rituals and trials, but they never understood that the only trial that mattered was the ability to love freely, without control, without fear. The necklace pulsed more intensely, casting dancing shadows on the walls of the small house. Through the window, Eleanor noticed the full moon rising in the night sky, perfectly aligned with the Big Dipper constellation. "This is the night," Madame Flora murmured. "The alignment that only occurs every 7 generations. What should we do?" Eleanor asked, feeling the necklace calling to her, whispering ancient secrets in a language she didn't comprehend with her mind, but her heart recognized. "What the Blackwoods always should have done." Audrey took Matthew's hand, and then Eleanor's, forming a circle. "Recognize that love is not control. It is freedom. It is affection freely given and freely received." Matthew, whose face had been an impenetrable mask of control for days, finally let down all his defenses. In his eyes, Eleanor saw the reflection of a man who had spent his life searching for something that was always within him, the capacity to love without reservations. "I want with affection," Matthew said, his voice breaking with emotion, "not as a Blackwood bound by traditions and curses, but as a man, a father, imperfect but sincere." Those words, so simple yet so profound, seemed to resonate with the necklace, whose light expanded to envelop all 3 of them in a luminous cocoon. The 7 trials, Madame Flora explained, were never about obedience or control. They were opportunities to demonstrate the 7 facets of true love: trust, respect, generosity, patience, commitment, forgiveness, and courage. Each Blackwood generation misinterpreted this as a test of submission. "And I perpetuated it," Matthew admitted, lowering his head. "I believed I was breaking tradition by seeking you, Eleanor, but I was following the same destructive pattern. Controlling, manipulating, testing." "But something changed," Audrey said, squeezing his hand. "When you discovered who Eleanor truly was, you chose truth over manipulation. You began to break the cycle." The necklace emitted a more intense flash, and for an instant, Eleanor could see, or perhaps feel, the presence of the 7 previous women. Not as victims of a dark tradition, but as guardians who had preserved a spark of truth through generations of misunderstanding. Each had contributed something essential to the lineage: Hope Blackwood faith, Marisol Cortez strength, Carmela Archer compassion, Dolores Fontaine resilience, and so on, until Audrey Miller, who had contributed the courage to break with the past for love. "The final ritual," Madame Flora said, "does not require spilled blood but revealed truth. Each of you must offer a truth never before expressed, a secret kept in the deepest part of your heart." Audrey was the first to speak. "I never stopped loving you, Matthew. Even in my moments of greatest fear and resentment, a part of me always longed to return. And every day, looking at Eleanor, I saw your eyes, your spirit, and I loved you through her." Matthew spoke next, his words emerging as if torn from the depths of his being. "When I discovered I possibly had a daughter, my first thought wasn't about the prophecy or the curse. It was a terrible fear of not knowing how to be a father, of repeating the cold and calculating mistakes with which I was raised. But now I know that I don't want to control your destiny, Eleanor. I want to support you as you create it for yourself. It was Eleanor's turn, and she felt the words flow naturally. Throughout my life, I felt that a part of me was lost, incomplete. In the convent, I dreamed of a family I never thought I would find. When I arrived at the manor, despite the fear and confusion, something in me recognized this place, recognized Matthew, as if my blood remembered what my mind had forgotten. I didn't come here by chance or manipulation. I came because somehow I always knew I was meant to find both of you. As she uttered these words, the necklace reached its maximum brilliance, almost blinding. The obsidian, normally black, became translucent, revealing within it a small flame that burned with its own light. Suddenly, the necklace separated from its chain and floated between them, pulsing one last time before fragmenting into 3 perfect pieces that gently fell into the hands of each one. "It is done," Madame Flora whispered with reverence. "The cycle is broken. The prophecy has been fulfilled, not as an end, but as a beginning." Eleanor looked at the fragment of obsidian in her hand. It was no longer completely black. It contained luminous veins that seemed to move beneath the surface, like stars in a night sky. "What does this mean?" she asked, looking up at the elderly woman. "That now each of you carries a part of the story, but none are bound by it. The Blackwood curse has transformed into a blessing, not only for you, but for all future generations." Madame Flora gestured towards the door. "Go. The rest of the path is yours to walk together." They left the small house into the starry night of Asheville. The moon illuminated the cobblestone streets with a silvery light that seemed new, as if they were seeing the world for the first time. "What do we do now?" Eleanor asked, holding her fragment of the necklace. Audrey smiled, intertwining her fingers with Matthew's. "We live. We learn to be a family, with all the imperfections and joys that entails." "Will we return to the manor?" Matthew asked, looking in the direction of the mountains where the Blackwood property had stood for generations. "It is your home, our family legacy," Eleanor replied. "But it needs to change, to transform from a place of secrets and control to a space of freedom and truth." "Perhaps we could turn it into a cultural center," Audrey suggested. "Open its doors to the town, to researchers, to artists. Transform centuries of isolation into connection." Matthew nodded slowly, as if the idea took root within him. A new beginning for the Blackwood lineage, no longer defined by a curse, but by the conscious choice to create something better. As they walked through the moonlit streets, Eleanor reflected on the extraordinary events that had transformed her life in just 7 days. She had arrived at Blackwood Manor as a stranger, a piece in an ancient game she didn't understand. She left as part of a newfound family, bearing a legacy that was no longer a burden, but an opportunity. The obsidian fragment in her hand glowed softly, reminding her that some traditions deserve to be preserved while others must be transformed. The true magic had never been in rituals or prophecies, but in the human capacity to choose love over fear, truth over manipulation, affection over control. As the 3 walked together under the stars, united not by obligation but by choice, Eleanor understood the deepest lesson of this entire experience, that even the oldest stories can have new endings when one dares to rewrite them with love. In the distance, the lights of Asheville shone like fallen stars, and beyond, the mountainous silhouettes where Blackwood Manor stood were silhouetted against the night sky. It no longer seemed a threatening place, but a blank canvas waiting to be painted with new colors, new traditions, new ways of loving. "I want with affection," Eleanor whispered to herself, feeling that the words now contained all the power and promise of the future that stretched before them. A future where the true ritual would not be of control and trials, but of acceptance and unconditional love. A future that, for the first time in 7 generations, would be entirely theirs to create.